This program airs statewide on California Public Television and is a California's Gold classic. Hi, I'm Huell. Right now I'm walking down some very historic track, and that is a very historic tunnel. In fact, this track and that tunnel, when it opened back in 1894, significantly changed the lives of all of the citizens of a little town located here on our Central Coast. Now, on this particular adventure, we're going to travel down this track and go through a number of those tunnels and find out firsthand why this particular section of railroad is still considered a major engineering feat. It's going to be a lot of fun, especially if you like old steam engines. So as always, you're invited to come on along with us as we continue our search together, this time riding the rails in search of California's gold. It's a beautiful part of the California landscape, part of our history too, and anyone who's ever driven up or down the Central Coast on the 101 has experienced it. The highway has a real steep grade to it, going up and then back down through the Cuesta Pass on the Santa Lucia mountain range. Now, crossing this mountain range throughout history has always been difficult, whether by horseback or stagecoach or automobile or train. And to set the scene for this train adventure, we really have to understand this pass. So first we drove up the grade, turned off onto an old dirt road, and then went up to the very top to find out firsthand.
We're looking at the road coming up that's commonly referred to as the Cuesta grade, the Cuesta, or the grade.
So the people around here have a lot of different terminology for it.
Well, they use those three pretty much interchangeably, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they do.
Now, the deal is that the road itself that we're looking at now, and that's the way most people travel on the grade. That's at what grade? What is the level?
That's a 7%, mostly. It varies somewhat, but it's basically a 7% grade, about 3.5 miles long.
Okay. Now, that's not hard for a car.
No, not for a car.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the truck's a different story. They grind up there pretty slowly when they're heavily loaded.
So the trucks don't like that at all.
Well, it's a necessary evil.
Yeah.
The alternatives go clear over to I-5 and come up the Central Valley, so if they want to come up the coast, this is the way they've got to come.
So the trucks and the cars have a 7% grade over 3.5 miles.
Correct.
Now, the railroad, that's another matter.
Yeah, the railroad, my understanding, they had to work with a maximum of 2% grade. And in order to accomplish that, they had to use a lot more miles and a bunch of tunnels to accomplish it.
The significance of this area that we're looking at right now was that this was the only way through here, wasn't it? Traditionally, I mean...
Essentially, yes. Come up this canyon, box canyon, get to the head of it, climb out, and then go on north. Horseback, it wouldn't be too bad. Once you wanted to put wheels on it, it became quite a bit of a problem.
So this was difficult even for the stagecoaches.
Oh, yes, yes.
Now, is this what we're looking at right now? Is this what kept San Luis Obispo so isolated for so many years? There's San Luis Obispo right over there, kind of nestled right in amongst all of this.
Yeah, just a physical barrier.
So San Luis Obispo was absolutely isolated, stuck in here, and the only way to get there was through, and you pointed out, these are some of the original roads down here.
Right down the bottom is the very first road and the second one. They both show down below us here, yes.
Well, after our geography lesson, we drove down into San Luis Obispo itself, a jewel of a town, with tree-lined streets, wonderfully restored old buildings, good schools and universities, and a beautiful mission. This is just a nice place to live. But back in the 1800s, because of its isolation and the engineering difficulty of getting over those mountains, It was literally one of the last places in California to get train service. In fact, it wasn't until May 5th, 1894, that the first train arrived, which was cause, of course, for a huge celebration. San Luis Obispo was finally part of the world. And to find out just how difficult it must have been to build that original rail line, we hooked up with some local citizens who had offered to take us out on the tracks, up and over the mountains, for a personal tour. And we're taking a tour in something that I've never seen before. What is this?
This is a high rail inspection vehicle, and we use this to inspect the main line and sidings along the SP lines.
Because when they told us that we were going to be going down the line today, I envisioned we were going to be on one of those hand carts like they used to use.
Well, we're in the 20th century now, so we'll make do.
How does this work? What happens here?
What I'm going to do is drive it onto the crossing, and I'll let the guide wheels down and lock them up, and we'll be ready to roll.
So in other words, this vehicle can either travel on the highway or on the tracks.
Yes, that's correct.
Well, let's take a look. This is what we're going to be traveling in today. Down the tracks. I'd never seen anything like this before.
No, this is something that's very, very unique to a railway operation. It will allow us to go through the tunnels and over trestles and places where you could not take an automobile.
Now we're going down what is the beginning of one of the toughest areas of this whole line, right?
This is one of the most difficult railroad engineering jobs in the American West. It's called the Cuesta, or Cuesta grade. When you say Cuesta grade, you're being redundant because Cuesta means a steep hill in Spanish. And the railroad got as far as Santa Margarita in 1887, and it just stalled there because the economy took a downturn, and Southern Pacific didn't want to invest any more money than absolutely necessary to keep the rail going.
Now, what we're talking about is an area that is real hilly, real steep.
Well, the Cuesta rises from the valley where San Luis Obispo is located and goes up to a gradient of about 1,500 to 1,700 feet. And that's a real climb for a railroad. Railroads don't like anything more than a 3% grade, and even 3% is a very sluggish climb for a railroad. So what they've done here is to construct a series of tunnels going to the grade at the other opposite side of the Santa Lucia Mountains. We're crossing a mountain range here. It's the tail end of a mountain range, and once we're through it, we go down into San Luis Obispo on a series of switchbacks and eventually over a classic 1894 trestle, which was the last thing to be completed on this part of the railroad.
Okay, here we go into our first tunnel, and it's dark in here. How big a deal was it to cut this railroad through here?
Well, in today's engineering technology, it would be a cinch. But in the 1894 technology, which was still using black powder, they were using dynamite, but also still using black powder, it was quite a job.
Well, going through that first tunnel was very interesting and a lot of fun, too. But before our journey was completed, we had gone in and out of 6 different tunnels and passed by one that had been boarded up. The trip also took us through some of the most spectacular vistas I've ever seen. Boy, this is a scenic,
isn't it? Yeah, this is absolutely incredible. And
of course, the railroad could have cared less about the scenery. They were just looking for the shortest route over the mountain.
But later on, like when the streamlined trains came in the late 1930s, the railway made much in their PR about this particular section of the line.
Really?
And encouraged ridership by advertising very heavily the Coast Daylight route. And even today on Amtrak, that they will make announcements announcing that you're going over Cuesta Grade, and later on we'll be going around to Horseshoe Curve, where you can see both the front and the back of the train simultaneously.
Look at this. This is... So a lot of people would ride this train just for the scenery.
A lot of people still ride the train just for the scenery along the coast here. It's just magnificent.
So we are making a total loop now?
This is the big horseshoe loop, and it was made necessary because of the gradient. Remember, we said railroads don't like anything more than a 3% gradient, so to stay below that, they had to double back in this very dramatic fashion. It essentially is the solution to a geometric problem. They tried to get the greatest amount of curve they could get without derailing the train. And as you can see, it is a very sharp loop, but it's not exactly a hairpin.
Wow, I've never been on a loop like this before. This is amazing.
Absolutely, and you get an incredible view of San Luis Obispo, and you can see up back there where we've come down the grade and are making the loop. And when you ride the passenger train, if you're in the middle of the train, you can see both the front of the train and the rear of the train simultaneously.
Yeah, we just came from up there, and now we're coming down around here.
Right.
Wow.
This was one of the basic engineering feats that the Southern Pacific Lines promoted in 1938 and beyond when they put on their world-famous daylight streamline trains, the horseshoe curve, one of the highlights of the route. It still is the highlight of the Amtrak's Coast Starlight.
To call this route an engineering feat is an understatement. In today's high-tech world, I think we forget that back in the 1800s, all these tunnels, all these cuts through the mountainsides, all this track, this whole thing was done completely by hand, most of it by Chinese laborers. In fact, there were so many Chinese living in the area, San Luis Obispo had its own Chinatown. The head man in the local Chinese community was a gentleman by the name of Louis. He ran the general store and looked out for the welfare of the Chinese laborers. Today, the original Louis store still stands in San Luis Obispo and is a state historical landmark. The store is run by Louis' son, who filled me in on the importance of the Chinese in getting that railroad completed. Now, how much would these Chinese workers make every day for this hard work?
They would receive $1.50 a day, out of which my father was paid 25 cents a day for room and board.
To provide them room and board.
Right, right. Now, the money came from the SP company,
Southern Pacific,
to my dad. My dad acted as a banker for all these Chinese because they had no way of keeping records or keeping the money. And they were very thoughtful about their families in China. So father would give them a receipt for all the money that they had made. And after a period of time, whenever they needed money, they came to my father for the money.
So he was a banker.
Oh, he was a banker too.
As well as providing all the food.
Right.
And the tents for them to stay in.
Oh, right.
How many Chinese were here at the peak of the railroad?
Oh,
thousands?
2,000, 1,500, 2,000.
Really?
You know, 200 or 300 here, 300 or 400 over here, etc. They worked in sections. They couldn't all work at the same time. So they worked towards each other, laying track. And they were laying track at a rate of a half a mile a day.
Really?
I mean, that was a real record now. That was a tremendous feat in those days.
Now, all they had to work with were picks and shovels. They had no machinery at all, did they?
Dynamite.
And dynamite.
Okay, do you know where that phrase came in? You haven't got a Chinaman's chance. That came from building the
railroad.
Yeah. All right, they hung these Chinese over the side of a cliff and drilled holes until they could put dynamite in, and the Chinese had to light it, and they had to haul him up. Well, sometimes they didn't haul him up fast enough, so that's where the expression came from.
You don't have a Chinaman's chance.
Yeah. Okay.
Wow.
We don't like the connotation Chinaman anymore. We use the word Chinese. That's a much softer sounding name.
You could feel the excitement as the good citizens of San Luis Obispo gathered at their train station. They were there to celebrate the 100th anniversary to the day that the first train came puffing into their town back on May 5th, 1894, an event that had a profound effect on the town's future. This is an exciting time for your town. Can you imagine what it would have been like 100 years ago?
Well, I think it was one of the highlights of the day. People could set their clock by when the trains came through, and it was one of those things everybody knew, and everybody would celebrate when they came through.
Yeah, but this was the first train.
Yes, yeah. Can you imagine, too, how they've heard about it from every place else in the United States, and then here now in California, in a little town of San Luis Obispo, finally the train comes here. This whole town had to have been aglow.
What do you think it was like back then, 100 years ago, when that first train pulled in?
Well, there were old people like me who had been waiting for 25 years for that train to arrive. And some of them were standing out there in the crowd waiting for the moment that it was going to occur, literally had tears in their eyes. And there was one old man who said, "I never thought it would really happen. It really occurred. I can't believe it. San Luis Obispo has a train."
You are the descendants of that original band?
The band
was an all-county band?
Right, it was formed in 1874, originally with the name of the San Luis Obispo Military Band. And it's gone through several metamorphoses until it's arrived now at the San Luis Obispo County Band. And it's been in continuous existence since 1874.
So here you are 100 years later.
Absolutely.
At the train station playing the same music that they played when that train arrived.
That's absolutely right. We even have some pretty long-time members of the band. One fellow who's here today playing with us joined this band in 1937.
Really? Well, let's hear, can we hear one of the original?
Absolutely. Little Sousa March called the Thunderer.
And they would have played that?
Oh, absolutely.
The Thunderer, okay, here we go. While the San Luis Obispo County Band was playing Sousa to an appreciative crowd waiting for the train to arrive, we drove 30 miles north of San Luis Obispo to the town of Paso Robles. There was a crowd there too, waiting at their station for the train to arrive. You see, the train would have to come through here before it started its trip down the Cuesta grade into San Luis Obispo. And then, almost right on time, the star of the show arrived. The old steam locomotive appeared, old 2472, which had actually run regularly on these very tracks from 1915 to 1946. Its permanent home these days is up in Redwood City at the Golden Gate Railway Museum. But for this special occasion, for this centennial celebration, it was heading south, manned entirely by volunteers, most of them former railroad people, who love this old steam engine. What do you think it is that people love so much? I mean, look, we've got 300 or 400 people standing right out here now.
Oh, yeah.
What is it about these old steam trains?
Well, when's the last time you seen one?
Yeah.
It's, look at all these young people here. They never even saw a steam train.
Yeah.
In the movies, maybe, but I think something different.
Now, how's the old engine holding up?
Oh, it's doing wonderfully today. We're real pleased with it. It's been a long time since we've pulled such a heavy train, and so we're really interested in seeing how well it behaves with this much loading, and I'm real happy with the way it's behaving. Everything's running according to Huell, and temperatures are good, and bearings are looking good, and all that kind of stuff.
She's holding up.
Hey, this is what it used to do. This is what it was supposed to do. It's a special thing for these people because it hasn't been around for 50 years, but it's only doing what it's supposed to do.
Well, we're back here in the back. You know, I just got through riding up in the engine. That is something.
It's quite a trip, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's so nice and smooth. And quiet.
Well, you know, it bumps along, but there's so much energy up there.
It's fantastic. The roar of the fire and all of it that just kind of comes together. But it's, I mean, how can you not enjoy that, you know? Yeah. One of the things that's really great is, I mean, okay, I'm old enough to remember what steam was like because I was a kid when it was around. But how do you explain that fascination for little kids today? You know, why do they come? But they do, and they cheer and they wave, and that's just, to me, that's fantastic. And it's really a magic machine. I'm a mechanical engineer, and to me, this is the ultimate piece of machinery.
Can you wonder what it was like for those people in San Luis Obispo watching the train come in for the first time?
Well, they probably saw it as a brand new window on the world because, you know, transportation wasn't an easy thing then. I mean, if you wanted to go to, well, Los Angeles wasn't much of a city at the time, but if you wanted to go to San Francisco, you know, it wasn't like, well, guys, let's get in the car and go. You're talking 2, 3, maybe more days. And the train changed all of that. It wasn't particularly affordable because it was expensive, but at least it made it possible.
Yeah.
And of course, it made a big difference to the farmers and whatnot down here because all of a sudden they had a giant new market that they could sell to.
It's quite a trick to take trains up a grade and down a grade.
Now, when you say quite a trick, what do you mean?
Well, it takes a lot of know-how and a lot of horsepower.
Uh-huh.
It takes as much horsepower to take a train downhill and hold it back, the brake horsepower, as it does to take it up the hill with working horsepower.
So you really had to know what you were doing when you were on this line.
That's right. You notice the speed we're moving?
Uh-huh.
We're not running 70 miles an hour because if you got your brake shoes up against this train at 50, 60 miles an hour, the friction would burn them up in a matter of a few yards and they would become worthless to you.
Uh-huh.
And so you have to keep the speed down in order to keep the wheels cool.
So we're slowing down now because we're going downhill.
We're traveling, we're not slowing down, we're traveling at approximately 25 miles an hour, which is the maximum speed on what they call heavy grade braking.
So there's never a dull moment up and down this line, is there?
No, you have to use every bit of ingenuity you have to take a train over this hill.
Yeah. What do you mean ingenuity?
Intellect.
Uh-huh.
Savvy. You don't get it in one day. My father was a locomotive engineer before me.
Really?
And my grandfathers before that built the railroads. They were construction contractors when they moved the dirt with teams and horses to build these tracks back at the turn of the century. A steam engine always generated a lot of curiosity, and it was thrilling because they were warm and alive, like a nice warm lady. And when you worked on them, and you could blow the whistle, and you could hear the rods clattering, you didn't even have a speedometer on them. You knew by the sound of the rods how fast you was going. They'll sound the whistle a little more now as we're coming into town.
So this is what was called the
horseshoe curve.
Horseshoe curve.
On the Coast Division.
Boy, this is something. Look, Louis, you can pan from one side and see the engine, and there's the back of the train.
Yeah, that's the only place I knew of where you could wave a load to the conductor on a 100-car freight train. I think there was a certain amount of pride in being able to take a train over this grade in one piece. It took a little bit of know-how.
What do you think that first engineer must have felt like back in 1894 pulling into San Luis Obispo?
That guy was real proud of the job he did and the thing that happened, because transportation being what it is, it was so important in those days. Since that time, we have jet airplanes and freeways, but in that day, all the dignitaries come to town on the train. And so they hauled the people and they hauled the freight.
Well, it was a historic day.
It was. It was a historic day. And this 100 years, if you think about it, in terms of eras, lots have happened since that first man come down this hill in 1894.
Meet me in San Luis, Louis, meet me at the train. Celebrate the link that's newest, all have we to gain. They have laid some brand new track now, and they finally close the gap now. So won't you meet me in San Luis, Louis, meet me at the train.
Well, hello everybody, I'm Huell Hauser, and I sure hope you enjoyed this adventure. If you'd like to see it again or share it with your family or friends, or perhaps donate a copy to your local school or library, it's available on video cassette and on DVD. All you have to do is call 1-800-266-5727, and we'll be glad to send it to you right away.